next time I ran into Forcade was at the inauguration of Richard Nixon, which at this point they figured that since the last place I had been was Texas, that I was Mike from Texas, because I had to be from somewhere, and that they wanted me to be the representative for Texas Yippies, because there wasn't a lot of Texas Yippies, I guess. There was a few, and so they wanted me to come up to the meeting where they were organizing the convention, and that's, you know, the same crowd was up there, and so they decided to send me to Washington, D.C., the first person to help organize the convention, and they'd given me this address of a guy that was supposedly someplace I could crash. As it turned out, it was just a guy that had been up hitchhiking, and he let me stay there one night, but that was like pretty much it, and so I didn't have a place to stay, I didn't have any money, and Dana wants me to, he had this idea to build a large rat float with Nixon's face on it that we would attempt to get into the inaugural parade. And I remember when he called me on the phone about how I liked the idea. I said, well, it sounds like a really dumb idea to me. He goes, well, everybody else really likes the idea. And then I think what he did when he hung up was we called other people and said, well, Mike really likes the idea. And pretty soon he had everybody agreeing that everybody else liked the idea. But nobody knew what it was supposed to look like or how it was going to be made. So my job is to try to start scanning materials and money to build this thing. And we finally found some hippies at a commune down on, I think it was Delaware Street, right behind the train station. And they were a bunch of, you know, commies with, you know, linen posters in the dining room and all kinds of lists of what people were supposed to be doing around the house. And so that was my headquarters for starting to build the float, but I didn't have any money and I wasn't getting any real support from the other Yippies, and they hadn't come to town yet. And then like about 3 days before the inauguration, everybody starts showing up, and finally Dana comes up with $500, and we find somebody that's got a van, and so we go to the hardware store and we buy a bunch of chicken wire and some 2x4s and some little wheels that look like they go on a small lawnmower. And we started building the float, and I was getting really tired, so Dana figures, well, the best thing to do is to take a little acid, that'll keep you going. So I did. So we spent all night building this float on acid, and it actually didn't turn out looking too bad. And we didn't have a parade permit because the police wouldn't give us one, because I think the last time the Yippies had a parade permit, they had a little riot or something just before my time. But I just know that they had decided to use the SDS parade route directly before the SDS used it. And it went down to one of the spots along the parade, the inaugural parade, where there would be a police barricade, but there's also all kinds of bleachers, and, you know, people were standing there waiting to catch the inaugural parade. And that was our whole point. We're going to take the rat down there, and then we're going to bust through the police line. And we were going to join the parade, and we had not only the rat float with Nixon's face on it, but Grimes Posnikoff, I don't know if you know him, he's the human jukebox. You can still see him down in Fisherman's Wharf. He lives in a little box, and if you put money in it, he jumps out and plays the trumpet. But he had brought 500 Mouseketeer hats. Again, I think this was Dana's idea. So we had like 500 people with Mouseketeer hats playing kazoos in front of the rat. But anyway, the night before, when we're still building it, the SDS guys come over and with all their tough guys and leather jackets and stuff, and said, look, if you guys try to go over to our parade route, we got a bunch of karate experts, and we're going to work you guys over. And of course, we're really, really high at this point, so we just laugh at them. And, you know, they weren't like the old SDS, you know, the really hardcores had split off into the Weather Underground, and these guys were off from the Progressive Labor Party. They were a bunch of intellectual wankers. And they just didn't like the counterculture. They didn't approve of drug use. They thought it was bourgeois decadence and all that sort of thing, that we were counter-revolutionaries, and they called us a lot of other names too. So anyway, it started raining that night, and the rat started to dissolve, and so we kept trying to put more paper on it. And finally, a warm wind came out like 2 hours before we're supposed to leave, and dries the whole float off. And we're painting it as we're trying to haul it out of the alleyway, and it's so big that it's actually rubbing on gutter pipes and stuff, and we're having to constantly touch up the paint. And we get out to our parade route, It was a really narrow alleyway back there. We had built it behind this house, but we hadn't measured the alley, and it was actually too big to get out.
How big was this rat?
Oh, it's bigger than this motel room. It was huge.
Right.
That was the whole point. And so we kind of squeezed it out there onto the street, and it was about 40 hours max, and we were up the whole time on acid. So we finally get it out in the street, and all the Yippies assemble, and then the cops, are onto us by now. And the only thing they're really concerned about is you could fit about 30 people inside this rat, and they just wanted to make sure there wasn't anybody inside. And we were really shocked that we hadn't thought of that, because that would have been cool. But anyway, so we got onto the SDS parade route, and nobody stopped us, and then we marched towards the inaugural parade route. And then we encountered our line of cops, and there was quite a few cops there, and they're all, in their riot gear. And so we started to push forward. Everybody gets forward right next to the police line, and everybody gets behind them, and you just kind of do the push forward thing to see if you could break through. And then they figured that out, what we were trying to do, so they sent in their little motorcycle squad. Yeah, there's about 1,000 of us now. We picked up a bunch of hippies on the way, and so they figured out what we were trying to do and figured they weren't going to let us do it. So they surrounded us with the little motor scooters that they used to ride around. I haven't seen those here this time, but and then they started clubbing us, and we all dispersed, and they grabbed the rat, and they called in this big flatbed truck. And they put the rat on the flatbed truck and drove away. And we were kind of all dejected. This was the end of our little party, and we were going to go down to the Washington Monument where, the Vietnam veterans were demonstrating, and there was really kind of a big gathering going on. And as we were walking down there, we noticed this flatbed truck is stuck in traffic, and it doesn't have any police escorts. So we went over and stopped the truck. We grabbed our rat back. It's on the flatbed. And so we just run over and grab it off the flatbed. We stopped the truck and tell him not to move it, and then we unlashed it. And we got the rat off, and now we're running with it. We're holding it in the air. And it's much more mobile that way than on these tiny little wheels that we had. And so we go, okay, we're going back to the parade route. And this time, we're running. And so we're about 500 of us. We're still wearing our Mickey Mouse hats. And we take just a plunge into the police line with the rat, and of course we get repelled and clubbed and pushed around. And this time they take the rat and they start beating it, and they're hitting Nixon in the face, and it's actually pretty funny. Nixon, I mean, he's kind of easy with that nose and those jowls, but so that was pretty much the end of that demo.
So where was Tom Prasad in this?
He wasn't. I don't think he actually came down to Washington, although he was at the planning meeting that we had in Columbus, Ohio. So I don't know exactly where he was. I think that might have been, I might have seen him one more time after that at a Yippie conference somewhere in Madison. But I think by then he'd kind of parted ways with Dana and AJ.